Amelia, I've got a quick question for you before we officially begin. How excited are you for today's episode on a scale of 1 to 10?
James, I'd say it's definitely a 10. This is one of those topics that can really transform how our listeners feel about speaking English. It's a game changer for sure.
A 10. I love that enthusiasm. Well then, let's not keep our amazing listeners waiting any longer. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Learning English Studio.
Hi everyone, it's so wonderful to have you all joining us today. I'm Amelia, and I'm ready to dive into something really special.
And I'm James. It's great to be here with all of you. We've got a fantastic episode planned that we think you're going to find incredibly helpful.
Today's topic is one that many beginners find a bit challenging, but it's absolutely essential for clear communication. We're going to be sharing some powerful English pronunciation tips that will make a real difference in how you sound.
Yes, pronunciation is such a key part of learning English, but it's often overlooked. We're going to break it down into simple, manageable steps that anyone can practice.
But before we jump into all that wonderful pronunciation advice, we have a small favor to ask. If you're enjoying our podcast and finding it helpful, please consider subscribing to Learning English Studio and hitting that like button.
And sharing our podcast with your friends or fellow English learners really helps us reach more people who might benefit from these tips. It makes a huge difference and allows us to keep creating content for you.
It really does, and we appreciate every single one of you who takes a moment to support our channel. Okay, James, I think we're ready to get started, shall we?
Absolutely. Let's dive into these pronunciation tips that are going to help our listeners sound more confident and natural when speaking English.
Perfect. So let's start with the basics. James, why do you think pronunciation is so important for English learners, especially beginners?
That's a great question, Amelia. You know, pronunciation is like the foundation of a house. If your foundation is weak, everything else becomes unstable. It doesn't matter how much vocabulary you know or how complex your grammar is. If people can't understand what you're saying, communication breaks down.
That's such a perfect analogy. I've seen so many students who have great English knowledge but struggle to be understood simply because of pronunciation issues. It can be really frustrating for them.
Absolutely. And here's something interesting. Many learners focus so much on grammar and vocabulary that they neglect pronunciation in the beginning, thinking they can fix it later. But pronunciation habits, once formed, are much harder to change than learning new words or grammar rules.
That's so true. It's much easier to develop good pronunciation habits from the start than to correct bad ones later. And I think many beginners feel overwhelmed by all the different sounds in English, especially ones that don't exist in their native language.
Oh, definitely. English has some sounds that can be really tricky depending on your first language, but the good news is that with focused practice and the right techniques, anyone can improve their pronunciation significantly.
So where should a beginner start? There's so much to cover when it comes to pronunciation. Individual sounds, word stress, sentence stress, intonation. It can feel overwhelming.
Well, I always recommend starting with the individual sounds, particularly the ones that are most different from your native language. But before we dive into specific sounds, let's talk about something even more fundamental: mouth position.
Ooh, mouth position. That's such an important but often overlooked aspect of pronunciation. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Different languages use different mouth positions to create sounds. For example, some languages require more tension in the lips, while others use more tongue movement. When learning English, it's helpful to pay attention to how native speakers position their lips, tongue, and jaw when they speak.
That's fascinating. And I bet most learners have never even thought about that. They're just trying to imitate the sounds they hear without understanding the mechanics behind them.
Exactly. And here's a simple exercise anyone can do. Watch a native English speaker talking, maybe in a movie or YouTube video, and pay attention to their mouth. Notice how their lips move, how their jaw drops for certain sounds, how their tongue touches different parts of their mouth.
That's such a practical tip. And I think it would be especially helpful for sounds that don't exist in a learner's native language. They can really see how those sounds are formed physically.
Absolutely. And you can even practice in front of a mirror at first. It might feel a bit silly, but it really helps to see what your mouth is doing and compare it to what native speakers do.
I can imagine some of our listeners feeling a bit self-conscious practicing in front of a mirror, but it's such great advice. Once you understand the mechanics, it becomes so much easier to produce those sounds correctly.
And here's something that might make people feel less self-conscious. Babies do this all the time when they're learning to speak. They watch their parents' mouths and try to imitate the movements. We're just going back to basics, really.
That's such a sweet way to think about it. We're all just babies learning a new language. So after paying attention to mouth position, what would be the next step for beginners?
I'd say focusing on the individual sounds that are most different from your native language. For example, many Asian speakers struggle with the difference between R and L, while Spanish speakers might find the th sound challenging.
Oh, that's so true. And I've noticed that even within English, there are regional differences in pronunciation that can be confusing for learners, like the difference between American and British pronunciation of certain words.
Absolutely, and that's why I always recommend beginners pick one accent to focus on initially, either American or British English, rather than trying to master both at once. Once you have a solid foundation in one, it's easier to understand and adapt to others.
That's such sensible advice. It's like trying to learn everything at once. It just leads to confusion and frustration. Better to focus on one thing and master it before moving on.
Exactly. And here's another important tip. Minimal pairs. These are words that differ by only one sound, like ship and sheep, or bat and bet. Practicing minimal pairs can really help train your ear to recognize and produce subtle sound differences.
Oh, minimal pairs are so helpful. I remember working with a student who couldn't hear the difference between ship and sheep, which led to some pretty funny misunderstandings.
I can imagine. And those misunderstandings show just how important small sound differences can be in English. Something as simple as changing one vowel sound can completely change the meaning of a word.
Definitely, and I think that's what makes pronunciation so challenging, but also so interesting. It's not just about making sounds correctly, it's about conveying meaning accurately.
And here's something that many beginners don't realize. English is a stress-timed language, which means some syllables and words are emphasized more than others. This is very different from many other languages that are syllable-timed, where each syllable gets equal time.
Oh, that's such an important point, and it's something that can make English sound quite musical or rhythmic compared to other languages. The stress patterns really give English its distinctive sound.
Exactly. And for beginners, understanding word stress, which syllable in a word gets emphasized, can make a huge difference in how understandable they are. For example, present, a gift, versus present, to give something.
That's such a great example, and I think many learners don't realize that changing the stress can completely change the meaning of a word. It's not just about getting the sounds right, but also the rhythm.
And here's a practical tip. When you learn a new word, don't just learn how it's spelled or what it means, also learn which syllable is stressed. Many dictionaries show this with an apostrophe before the stressed syllable.
That's such valuable advice, and I think it would be helpful to recommend some resources for beginners who want to work on their pronunciation. Are there any apps or websites you'd particularly recommend?
There are so many great resources available now. For individual sounds, I often recommend websites that have phonetic charts with audio examples, so you can hear exactly how each sound is made. For overall pronunciation, apps that give you feedback on your pronunciation can be really helpful.
That's fantastic, and I think having that immediate feedback can really accelerate the learning process. It's like having a pronunciation coach available 24/7.
Absolutely. And here's something that doesn't require any technology at all: listening and repeating. Simply listening carefully to how native speakers pronounce words and then trying to imitate them exactly. It's simple but incredibly effective.
That's so true, and I think it's something we all did naturally when learning our first language as children. We listened, we imitated, we got feedback, and we improved. It's the same process, just with a different language.
Exactly. And here's a fun exercise. Pick a short audio clip of a native speaker, maybe 15 to 30 seconds, and listen to it multiple times. Then try to record yourself saying the same thing and compare your pronunciation to the original.
Oh, that's such a great exercise. It's like having a before and after comparison, and it really helps you identify specific areas where you need to improve.
And don't worry about sounding exactly like the native speaker. That's not the goal. The goal is to be clear and easily understood. Your accent is part of who you are, and that's okay.
That's such an important and reassuring point. I think many learners feel like they need to eliminate their accent completely, but that's neither realistic nor necessary. Clear communication is what matters most.
Absolutely. And here's something that might surprise our listeners. Even native speakers have different accents and don't pronounce everything correctly all the time. There's no single perfect English pronunciation.
That's so true, and I think realizing that can take a lot of pressure off learners. They don't have to sound like a news announcer from the BBC or CNN to be considered good at English.
Exactly. And focusing too much on perfect pronunciation can actually make you more self-conscious and less fluent. It's better to aim for clear, confident communication than perfection.
That's such wise advice, and I think it ties into what we were saying earlier about communication being about connection, not perfection. Your unique voice and perspective are what make conversations interesting, not perfect pronunciation.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Slow down. Many learners think that speaking quickly will make them sound more fluent, but actually, speaking more slowly and clearly is much more effective.
Oh, that's such an important point. And I've noticed that when people get nervous or excited, they tend to speak faster, which makes their pronunciation less clear. Slowing down really helps with both pronunciation and confidence.
Absolutely. And here's something interesting. When you speak more slowly, you not only pronounce words more clearly, but you also give yourself more time to think about what you want to say next. It's a win-win.
That's such a great insight, and I think it applies to native speakers too. When we're nervous or explaining something complex, we tend to speak more slowly and deliberately to be clearer.
Exactly. And here's a practical technique. Try reading English texts out loud at a slower pace than you would normally speak. Focus on pronouncing each word clearly and correctly. This can really help build good pronunciation habits.
That's such a great exercise, and I think it's especially helpful because reading gives you the time to focus on pronunciation without the added pressure of having to come up with what to say next.
And you can start with simple texts. Children's books are actually excellent for pronunciation practice because they use basic vocabulary and clear sentence structures. Plus, they're often written with a certain rhythm that makes them fun to read aloud.
That's such a brilliant suggestion, and I bet many of our listeners have access to children's books, either at home or online. It's a resource that's readily available and perfect for pronunciation practice.
And here's another tip that many beginners find helpful. Exaggerate the sounds and mouth movements at first. It might feel silly, but exaggerating helps your muscles learn the correct movements for English sounds.
I can just imagine our listeners practicing with exaggerated expressions, but it's so true. Sometimes you need to overdo it at first to build the muscle memory for correct pronunciation.
And it's like learning any physical skill. When you're learning to play tennis, you exaggerate your movements at first to get the form right. It's the same with pronunciation. Once your muscles learn the correct movements, you can make them more subtle and natural.
That's such a great analogy, and I think it helps to think of pronunciation as a physical skill rather than just an intellectual one. It's about training your mouth muscles to make new movements.
Exactly. And here's something that can really help with this. Tongue twisters. They're fun and challenging, and they're great for practicing specific sounds or sound combinations that might be difficult for you.
Ooh, tongue twisters are so much fun, and they're such a great way to practice pronunciation without it feeling like a boring drill. Do you have any favorite tongue twisters for beginners?
Haha, I do. For practicing the TH sound, 30,000 Thieves is a classic. For S and SH sounds, She Sells Seashells by the Seashore is perfect. And for R and L, Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry is challenging but effective.
Those are great, and I think starting with shorter, simpler tongue twisters and gradually working up to more complex ones is a good approach. You don't want to overwhelm yourself in the beginning.
Absolutely. And here's something important. Don't just say the tongue twisters fast. Say them slowly first, focusing on correct pronunciation, and then gradually increase your speed as you become more comfortable.
That's such good advice, and I think it applies to all aspects of pronunciation practice. Start slow and correct, then gradually build up speed and naturalness.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. pay attention to how words connect in natural speech. In English, words don't always sound separate. They often blend together, which can be confusing for learners.
Oh, that's such an important point. And I think it's something that many learners don't realize until they've been studying for a while. They learn individual words, but then can't understand when native speakers seem to mush them all together.
Exactly. And here's a common example. What are you doing often sounds like what you doing in casual speech. Understanding these connected speech patterns can really help with both your listening comprehension and your own pronunciation.
That's such a great example, and I think it explains why learners sometimes understand individual words but struggle to understand whole sentences in natural conversation.
And here's a practical tip. When you're listening to native English speakers, pay attention to where words seem to connect or blend. Try to imitate these connections in your own speech to sound more natural.
That's such helpful advice, and I think it really highlights the importance of listening practice alongside pronunciation practice. They're two sides of the same coin, really.
Absolutely. And here's something that many beginners don't realize. English has a rhythm, a certain musicality to it. Some syllables are stressed, some are unstressed. Some words are emphasized, others are reduced. Understanding this rhythm can make a huge difference in your pronunciation.
Oh, that's so true. And I think that's what makes English sound, well, like English. It's not just about individual sounds, but about the overall rhythm and flow of the language.
And here's a fun way to practice this. Try tapping out the rhythm of English sentences as you hear them. Notice how some beats are stronger and others are weaker. This can help you internalize the natural rhythm of English.
That's such a creative idea, and I think it would be especially helpful for learners who are more musically inclined. They might naturally pick up on the rhythm and musicality of English.
And if you're not particularly musical, everyone can appreciate rhythm. We all have an innate sense of rhythm in our bodies, our heartbeat, our breathing. Tapping into that can really help with English pronunciation.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it, and it reminds me that language is so much more than just rules and vocabulary. It's living, breathing, and has its own rhythm and flow.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Record yourself speaking English and listen back. It might feel a bit uncomfortable at first, but it's one of the most effective ways to identify areas where you need to improve.
That's such valuable advice, and I think many learners are surprised when they hear themselves speaking. They often sound different than they imagine they do. It's such an eye-opening experience.
And you don't need any fancy equipment. Your phone's voice recorder is perfectly fine for this. Just record yourself reading a short text or speaking for a minute about something simple, then listen back and compare it to a native speaker.
That's such a practical and accessible tip, and I think it really helps learners become more aware of their own pronunciation habits, both good and bad.
And here's something important. When you listen to yourself, don't just focus on what you're doing wrong. Also notice what you're doing well. Celebrating your progress and acknowledging your strengths can really boost your confidence.
That's such an important and encouraging point, and I think it applies to all aspects of language learning, not just pronunciation. We tend to be so critical of ourselves and forget to acknowledge how far we've come.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Find a pronunciation model you like and imitate them. This could be a news anchor, an actor, a YouTuber, anyone whose pronunciation you admire and find easy to understand.
That's such great advice, and I think having a specific model to imitate makes pronunciation practice more focused and effective. It's like having a target to aim for.
And it doesn't mean you want to sound exactly like them. It's just about using their pronunciation as a reference point to help you develop your own clear, natural pronunciation.
That's such an important distinction, and I think it helps learners understand that imitation is a tool for learning, not a goal in itself. The goal is clear communication, not becoming a carbon copy of someone else.
And here's something that can really help with this. Choose someone whose speaking style you enjoy. If you find their voice pleasant to listen to, you'll be more motivated to practice imitating their pronunciation.
That's such a great tip, and I think it highlights the importance of enjoyment in language learning. When you're having fun, you're more likely to stick with it and make progress.
And here's another practical tip. Use pronunciation apps that give you instant feedback. Many of these apps use speech recognition technology to analyze your pronunciation and tell you which sounds or words you need to work on.
That's such a modern and effective approach to pronunciation practice, and I think having that immediate feedback can really accelerate the learning process.
And these apps are especially helpful because you can practice anytime, anywhere. On the bus, waiting in line, during your lunch break, they make pronunciation practice accessible and convenient.
That's so true, and I think convenience is such an important factor in language learning. The easier it is to practice, the more likely you are to do it consistently.
And here's something important. Consistency is key when it comes to pronunciation improvement. Practicing for 10-15 minutes every day is much more effective than practicing for 2 hours once a week.
That's such valuable advice, and I think it applies to all aspects of language learning. Small, consistent efforts really add up over time and lead to significant improvement.
And here's a fun way to make pronunciation practice a daily habit. Link it to something you already do every day. For example, practice pronunciation while you're brushing your teeth, or during your morning coffee, or right before bed.
That's such a clever idea, and I think it really highlights the importance of building habits rather than relying on willpower. When something becomes a habit, you do it automatically without having to motivate yourself.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Focus on the sounds that make the biggest difference in how well you're understood. Not all sounds are equally important. Some are more critical for clear communication than others.
That's such a strategic approach, and I think it's especially helpful for beginners who might feel overwhelmed by all the different sounds they need to master.
And here's something that might surprise our listeners. Vowel sounds are generally more important for clear communication than consonant sounds. English has about 20 vowel sounds, depending on the accent, and they can be quite subtle and tricky.
That's so interesting, and I think many learners focus more on consonants because they seem more distinct and easier to identify, but vowels are really the heart of English pronunciation.
And here's a practical tip. When you're learning a new word, pay special attention to the vowel sound. Vowel errors are often more noticeable and can cause more misunderstandings than consonant errors.
That's such valuable advice, and I think it really helps learners prioritize their pronunciation practice and focus on what will make the biggest difference in how well they're understood.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Learn the International Phonetic Alphabet symbols for English. It might seem a bit technical at first, but it's incredibly helpful for understanding exactly how words should be pronounced.
That's such a great suggestion, and I think the IPA is like a secret code that, once you crack it, makes pronunciation so much clearer and less mysterious.
And you don't need to learn the entire IPA system, just the symbols used for English sounds. Many dictionaries show pronunciation using IPA symbols, so understanding them can really help you use dictionaries more effectively.
That's such a practical point, and I think it highlights how learning the IPA can make you a more independent and effective language learner in the long run.
And here's something that can make learning the IPA more fun. There are charts and diagrams online that show exactly where in your mouth each sound is produced. It's like having a map of your mouth for English sounds.
That's such a great resource, and I think visual learners especially would benefit from seeing exactly how each sound is made. It takes away a lot of the guesswork.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation in context, not just in isolation. It's more effective to practice sounds as part of words and sentences rather than just making individual sounds.
That's such an important point, and I think it's because language is ultimately about communication, not just making sounds. Practicing in context helps you connect pronunciation to meaning.
And here's a practical way to do this. Find short dialogues or conversations that include the sounds you're working on. Practice these dialogues until you can say them smoothly and naturally.
That's such great advice, and I think it makes pronunciation practice much more meaningful and engaging. You're not just making sounds, you're communicating.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Choose dialogues that are relevant to your life and interests. If you're a student, practice dialogues about school. If you work in customer service, practice customer service conversations.
That's such a brilliant suggestion, and I think it really highlights the importance of personalization in language learning. When you're practicing something you'll actually use, you're more motivated and the learning sticks better.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Be patient with yourself.
Pronunciation improvement takes time, and progress isn't always linear. Some days you'll feel like you're making great progress, other days you might feel like you're going backwards.
That's such an encouraging and realistic message, and I think all language learners experience those frustrating plateaus where it feels like they're not making any progress, no matter how hard they try.
And here's something to remember. These plateaus are normal and temporary. Your brain is consolidating what you've learned, even if it doesn't feel like it. If you keep practicing consistently, you'll eventually have a breakthrough and reach the next level.
That's such an encouraging perspective, and I think it really helps learners understand that plateaus are actually a sign of progress, not stagnation. Your brain is working hard even when it doesn't feel like it.
And here's something that can help during these frustrating periods. Keep a pronunciation journal. Record yourself saying the same words or sentences every week and listen back to earlier recordings. You'll be amazed at how much you've improved even when it doesn't feel like it.
That's such a great idea, and I think it really helps make progress more visible and tangible. Sometimes we don't notice our gradual improvement until we look back at where we started.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Find a language exchange partner or a tutor who can give you feedback on your pronunciation. Self-correction is good, but getting feedback from others is invaluable.
That's such valuable advice, and I think having someone to practice with can make pronunciation practice much more fun and less isolating.
And even if you can't find a regular practice partner, there are online communities where you can record yourself speaking and get feedback from other learners and native speakers. It's amazing how supportive these communities can be.
That's so true, and I think it really highlights how technology has made language learning so much more accessible and social. You don't have to learn in isolation anymore.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Use visual aids to help you remember correct pronunciation. For example, you can use color coding to highlight different sounds in words, or draw little diagrams to show mouth position.
That's such a creative idea, and I think it's especially helpful for visual learners who might struggle with purely auditory learning methods.
And you don't need to be an artist. Simple stick figures showing tongue position or basic diagrams of the mouth can be incredibly helpful for remembering how to make specific sounds.
That's such a great point, and I think it really shows that there are many different ways to approach pronunciation practice. You just need to find what works best for you.
And here's something important. Everyone learns differently, so what works for one person might not work for another. Experiment with different techniques and find the ones that are most effective and enjoyable for you.
That's such wise advice, and I think it really empowers learners to take control of their own learning journey and find what works best for them, rather than just following someone else's prescription.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Don't just focus on the sounds that are difficult for you. Also practice the sounds that are similar to sounds in your native language. This can help build confidence and make pronunciation practice more balanced.
That's such a great point, and I think it's easy to get fixated on the challenging aspects of pronunciation and forget to acknowledge and practice the areas where you're already doing well.
And here's something that can make this more effective. Create a pronunciation checklist with all the English sounds. Check off the ones you've mastered and focus on the ones that still need work. This can help you see your progress and identify what to work on next.
That's such a practical and organized approach, and I think it really helps learners see pronunciation improvement as a manageable, step-by-step process, rather than an overwhelming task.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation when you're in a good mood. It might sound silly, but your emotional state can affect how well you learn. When you're relaxed and happy, you're more open to learning and more likely to retain what you practice.
That's such an interesting and insightful point, and I think it really highlights the mind-body connection in learning. Our mental and emotional state really does affect how well we learn.
And here's something that can help with this. Create a pleasant environment for your pronunciation practice. Maybe light a candle, play some soft music, or practice in a place where you feel comfortable and relaxed.
That's such a lovely idea, and I think it really shows that learning doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a pleasant and enjoyable experience when you create the right environment for it.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation with mnemonic devices to help you remember correct pronunciation. For example, you could create a silly sentence or image to help you remember how to pronounce a tricky word.
That's such a creative and effective technique, and I think it really shows how making learning personal and memorable can make it so much more effective.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Make your mnemonic devices funny or exaggerated. The more unusual or humorous something is, the more likely you are to remember it.
That's such a great point, and I think it really highlights the role of emotion and humor in learning. When something makes us laugh or feel something, it sticks in our memory much better.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation with a purpose. Instead of just practicing random words, practice words and sentences that you'll actually use in your daily life.
That's such valuable advice, and I think it really connects pronunciation practice to real communication, which is ultimately what language learning is all about.
And here's a practical way to do this. Make a list of words and phrases you use regularly in your native language and practice saying them in English. For example, if you're a coffee lover, practice ordering coffee in English.
That's such a brilliant suggestion, and I think it really makes pronunciation practice immediately relevant and useful. You're not just learning for some future need, you're learning for right now.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Don't just focus on individual words, also practice sentence stress and intonation. English has a certain melody, and getting this right can make a huge difference in how natural you sound.
That's such an important point, and I think it's something many learners overlook in the beginning. They focus so much on individual words that they don't pay attention to the bigger picture of how sentences flow.
And here's something that can help with this. Listen to how native speakers use pitch and stress to convey meaning. For example, questions usually have a rising intonation at the end, while statements usually have a falling intonation.
That's such a great example, and I think it really shows how intonation isn't just about sounding musical, it's about conveying meaning and emotion.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation with physical movement. For example, you could gesture or move your body in a way that matches the rhythm of English sentences.
That's such an interesting and kinesthetic approach, and I think it would be especially helpful for learners who are more physical in their learning style.
And you don't need to be a dancer. Simple movements like tapping your foot or nodding your head to the rhythm of English sentences can help you internalize the natural flow of the language.
That's such a great point, and I think it really shows that there are many different ways to learn pronunciation. You just need to find what works best for you.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation in different emotional states. Try saying the same sentence as if you're happy, sad, angry, surprised, etc. This can help you understand how emotion affects pronunciation in English.
That's such a fascinating and advanced suggestion, and I think it really shows how pronunciation is connected to expression and communication, not just making sounds correctly.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Make your movie scenes or TV clips where actors express different emotions and pay attention to how their pronunciation changes. Then try to imitate these emotional variations.
That's such a great idea, and I think it really makes pronunciation practice more dynamic and interesting. You're not just learning sounds, you're learning expression.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation when you're not just speaking, also practice it when you're listening. Active listening can really help improve your own pronunciation.
That's such an insightful point, and I think it really highlights the connection between listening and speaking. They're two sides of the same coin.
And here's a practical way to do this. When you're listening to English, try to identify specific sounds or pronunciation features. For example, you could focus on noticing how different speakers pronounce the TH sound or how they use sentence stress.
That's such a great active listening technique, and I think it really helps train your ear to notice the subtle details of English pronunciation.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Use technology to your advantage. There's so many apps, websites, and tools available now that can help with pronunciation practice. Take advantage of them.
That's such valuable advice, and I think it really shows how fortunate modern language learners are to have access to so many resources that weren't available to previous generations.
And here's something that can help you make the most of these resources. Try out different tools and find the ones that work best for you. Some people prefer apps, others prefer websites, others prefer YouTube videos. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
That's such a great point, and I think it really empowers learners to take control of their own learning journey and find what works best for them, rather than just using whatever's most popular or recommended.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Set specific, achievable pronunciation goals. Instead of just saying, I want to improve my pronunciation, try something like, I want to master the TH sound this month, or I want to be able to pronounce these 10 words correctly by the end of the week.
That's such brilliant advice, and I think it really shows the power of goal setting in language learning. Specific, measurable goals are so much more effective than vague aspirations.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Write down your goals and track your progress. Seeing how far you've come can be incredibly motivating and help you stay on track.
That's such a great point, and I think it really highlights the importance of reflection and self-assessment in language learning. When you can see your progress, you're more likely to stay motivated.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Celebrate your pronunciation successes, no matter how small they might seem. Did you finally pronounce a tricky word correctly? Celebrate. Did someone understand you easily in a conversation? Celebrate.
That's such an important and encouraging point, and I think it really shows the importance of positive reinforcement in learning. When we acknowledge and celebrate our progress, we're more motivated to keep going.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Share your successes with others. Tell a friend, post in an online community, or just write it down in a journal. Sharing your victories makes them more real and reinforces your progress.
That's such a great idea, and I think it really highlights the social aspect of learning. When we share our journey with others, it becomes more meaningful and enjoyable.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Don't compare your pronunciation to native speakers. Instead, compare it to how you used to pronounce. The only person you should compete with is your past self.
That's such wise and empowering advice, and I think it really helps learners focus on their own progress rather than feeling discouraged by unrealistic comparisons.
And here's something to remember. Even native speakers have different accents and don't pronounce everything correctly all the time. There's no single perfect English pronunciation, and your accent is part of who you are.
That's such an important and reassuring point, and I think it really takes the pressure off learners to sound like someone they're not. The goal is clear communication, not erasing your identity.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation in low-stakes situations first. Don't jump into high-pressure situations like job interviews or important presentations until you feel more confident with your pronunciation.
That's such practical and sensible advice, and I think it really helps learners build confidence gradually rather than putting themselves in situations that might be discouraging.
And here's something that can help with this. Start by practicing with friends, family, or language exchange partners who are supportive and understanding. As you build confidence, you can gradually move to more challenging situations.
That's such a great progression, and I think it really shows how confidence is built gradually through successful experiences, not by jumping into difficult situations right away.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Use context to your advantage. When you're speaking, use gestures, facial expressions, and other nonverbal cues to help convey your meaning. This can take some pressure off your pronunciation.
That's such brilliant advice, and I think it really shows how communication is so much more than just words. Nonverbal communication can really help bridge any pronunciation gaps.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Observe how native speakers use gestures and facial expressions when they talk. Try to incorporate some of these natural movements into your own communication.
That's such a great point, and I think it really highlights how language is embodied. It's not just about sounds, but about the whole body communicating.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification if someone doesn't understand you. You could say something like, "Did that make sense?" Or, "Let me try saying that differently."
That's such valuable advice, and I think it really shows how communication is so much more than just words. Nonverbal communication can really help bridge any pronunciation gaps.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Learn some phrases for asking for clarification or repetition. Having these phrases ready can make you feel more confident in conversations, knowing you have tools to handle misunderstandings.
That's such a practical and empowering tip, and I think it really helps learners feel more in control of their conversations rather than feeling helpless when they're not understood.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Practice pronunciation with a mirror. It might feel a bit silly at first, but being able to see how your mouth is moving can help you make adjustments to produce sounds more correctly.
That's such a great suggestion, and I think it really helps learners connect the physical movements of their mouth to the sounds they're producing.
And here's something that can make this even more effective. Watch videos of native speakers saying the sounds you're working on, then try to imitate their mouth movements in the mirror. This visual feedback can be incredibly helpful.
That's such a brilliant idea, and I think it really shows how multi-sensory learning can be so effective, seeing, hearing, and feeling the movements all at once.
And here's another tip that can really help beginners. Be patient with yourself and enjoy the process. Pronunciation improvement takes time, but it can also be a fun and rewarding journey if you approach it with the right mindset.
That's such a perfect note to end on, and I think it really captures the essence of good language learning: patience, persistence, and enjoyment.
And remember, everyone's pronunciation journey is unique. What works for one person might not work for another. The key is to find the techniques and approaches that work best for you and practice them consistently.
That's such an important and empowering message, and I think it really encourages learners to take ownership of their learning journey and find what works best for them.
And here's something to remember. Every small step forward is progress. Even if you only master one new sound this week, that's still progress worth celebrating.
That's such an encouraging perspective, and I think it really helps learners appreciate their progress, no matter how small it might seem.
And before we wrap up, I want to remind our listeners that pronunciation is just one aspect of learning English. It's important, but don't let it overshadow other aspects like vocabulary, grammar, and communication skills.
That's such a balanced and wise point, and I think it really helps learners keep pronunciation in perspective. It's important, but it's not the only thing that matters.
And here's something to remember. The goal of pronunciation practice isn't to sound like a native speaker, but to be clearly understood. Your accent is part of who you are, and that's okay.
That's such an important and reassuring message, and I think it really takes the pressure off learners to sound like someone they're not. The goal is clear communication, not perfection.
And now it's time for our favorite part of the show, where we get to interact with you, our amazing learning community.
Oh, I love this part. It's so fun to hear from everyone and see how you're applying what you learn on the podcast.
So today, we have a little challenge for you. We want to know which pronunciation tip resonated most with you and why. Here are your options. Option 1, focus on mouth position, because you want to understand the physical mechanics of English sounds. Option 2, practice with minimal pairs, because you want to train your ear to recognize subtle sound differences. Option 3, record yourself speaking, because you want to hear your own pronunciation and identify areas for improvement. Option 4, use the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, because you want a systematic approach to understanding pronunciation. Option 5, practice in front of a mirror, because you're a visual learner who wants to see how your mouth moves.
Ooh, those are great options, and I'm curious to see which one everyone chooses. Each person might connect with a different tip depending on their learning style and current challenges.
Exactly. So leave us a comment letting us know which option you chose and why. And here's the fun part. Try using one of the pronunciation tips we discussed in your comment. Maybe focus on a specific sound or word that you've been working on.
That's such a brilliant idea. Practice makes perfect, right? And this way, you're not just telling us which tip you like, you're actively practicing your English pronunciation right in the comments.
And don't worry about making mistakes. Remember what we said about embracing imperfection. We just want to see you trying and practicing.
And here's another fun challenge. Choose one English sound that you find difficult and practice it for just 5 minutes every day this week. Then let us know how it goes.
Ooh, I love that. It's like a mini pronunciation challenge, and I bet our listeners will be surprised at how much they can improve with just 5 minutes of focused practice every day.
And don't forget to share your progress with us. We love celebrating your victories, no matter how small they might seem. Every step forward is worth acknowledging.
And if you have a friend who's also learning English, why not share this episode with them? Maybe you can practice these pronunciation tips together and keep each other motivated.
That's such a great idea. Learning together is always more fun, and you can even make a game out of it. Who can master a tricky sound first, or who can come up with the most creative mnemonic device for remembering pronunciation?
I love that. A little friendly competition can be so motivating. Just remember that the real goal is progress, not perfection.
And don't forget to subscribe to Learning English Studio if you haven't already. We have so many more exciting episodes coming up with practical tips to help you master English.
And follow us on social media too. We share extra content, behind-the-scenes moments, and sometimes we even post special pronunciation challenges just for our followers.
That's right. We're in this together, and we're here to support you every step of the way on your English learning journey.
Well, that's all for today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember, clear communication is the goal, not perfect pronunciation. You've got this.
Absolutely. Keep practicing, stay positive, and most importantly, enjoy the process. We'll see you next time on Learning English Studio.
Bye for now, and happy learning.